yourself before someone. That's what it means. Here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَنْتُمْ أَذِلَّةٌ, that you were inferior to their force, meaning you were far less in their force. Far less. You were far less in their force. فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so fear Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, so fear Allah. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ, so that happily or perhaps you are always going to show thanks. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. Now look at what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does in the verse, in Badr. That, look, you're outnumbered, there's 113 of you. There's 960 Quraysh coming to kill you. And you're defending against 113, you're defending 113 defending against 960. That's the odds. That's the odds. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells them, we gave you victory, we're going to give you victory. And even though you're inferior in numbers, by force, right? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ, so fear Allah. Have God-fearness of Allah. That's what Allah tells the believers. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ, because Allah subhanahu, perhaps He wants you to always be or show thankfulness. Always. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sometimes we understand shukr.
No.
Sometimes we understand shukr. We always say, even I will make khutbahs and stuff, and I'll say that shukr is when you thank the mun'im for a ni'mah. You have a ni'mah, وَيَشْكُرَ الْمُنْعِمِ. The person who is shukr, the person who does thankfulness, gratefulness, is the one who recognizes a blessing. They recognize a blessing, a ni'mah, and they thank the one who bestows the ni'am. The mun'im is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one who bestows the blessing. Who bestows blessing on you? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the mun'im. The ni'mah is a blessing that comes to you. So when we classify shukr, thankfulness, we say that it's looking at a blessing and then thanking the one who bestowed it upon you. That's shukr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? That means that you look at a blessing. Now, if you have something that is not considered a blessing, would you thank Allah? Would you thank Allah? Look at how the projection of the believers is always to the akhirah. If you look as a believer only to this world, dunya, if you look only to dunya, you're going to be ungrateful for many things that are actually beneficial to you. You are. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that even against the odds, we gave you nasr, we gave you help. And you were inferior in force. But Allah subhanahu wants you to have taqwa, consciousness, fear of Allah, so that you can be thankful and show gratefulness. Meaning that gratefulness is not only in the face when everything is going well and you're looking and you're surrounded by affluence and you're surrounded by all this stuff and people are happy with you and you thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? But if something is not going right, you can also gain blessings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like there are people who get sick. There are people who get sick. And during their sickness, they return to Allah. They go to Allah. They raise their hands to Allah. That's what happens. And the Prophet ﷺ says sickness is a means of Allah falling sins from your body, like leaves falling off of a tree. Sickness. So in the end, sickness is what? A cleansing, a purification from sins. That's what it is. So when you get healthy and you feel closer to Allah, you feel nearer to Allah, that sickness that you thought was a dhulm, that was hardship, becomes what then to you? Something that benefited you. So you thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't you? Thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the odds in Badr was against the believers, tremendously against the believers. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells them, we want you, we're going to give you victory, and we want you to fear Allah. We want you to fear Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells them, fear Allah. That perhaps you will always show gratitude. You'll always be thankful. You'll always show thankfulness. There's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who says it. And then He says, إِذْ تَقُولُ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ أَلَمْ يَكْفِيكُمْ أَنْ يُمَدُّكُمْ رَبُّكُمْ بِثَلَاثَةِ أَعْلَافٍ مِنَ الْمَلَائِكَةِ مُنْزِلِينَ. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and when you were telling believers, إِفْتَقُولُ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ, when you were addressing this to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing the Prophet. He says, إِفْتَقُولُ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ, when you were telling the believers, أَلَمْ يَكْفِيكُمْ أَنْ يُمَدُّكُمْ, is it not enough for you that Allah will powerfully strengthen you with 3,000 angels sent down? That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling the Prophet. And here, if the Qul al-Mu'mineen, did you not say, were you not telling the believers, is it not enough for you? Alam yakfikum, meaning in the distant. Lam is a nafi for mustaqbil. It's the opposition, it's opposing something or negating something that in the future. That's what the word led is. So the Prophet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet, were you not telling them that is it not going to be enough for them that we're going to send down 3,000 angels to you? Is it not enough? That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet ﷺ to tell them. Did you not tell them this? Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants them to have faith and to strengthen their faith. That's what He wants. He wants them to strengthen their faith with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what the Prophet ﷺ is saying to them. He's saying this to them. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bala, wa in tasbiru, Bala, in tasbiru wa tattaqu, wa yatukum min fawrihim, hada yumiddukum, hada yumdidukum rabbukum, bi khamsati alafin min al-malaikati musawwimin. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, indeed it is. What? That He sends 3,000 angels to them. Is it not enough? Yes, it is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is enough. Right? In tasbiru wa tattaqu. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says what? That if you were steadfast and patient, if you're patient, wa tattaqu and God-fearing, then ever should you fall should they fall on you this instant as one, if they were going to come at you, وَيَأْتُوكُمْ مِنْ فَوْرِهِمْ, if they were going to come at you this very minute, this very instant, if they were going to come at you, right? What happens? يُمْدِدْكُمْ رَبُّكُمْ بِخَمْسَةِ آلَافٍ, your Lord will roundly aid you with 5,000 angels. Musawwimin, wearing their own battle token. That what would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do? He would send them 5,000 angels, not 3. If they came to you right now, don't worry about it. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying. If they came to you right now, Allah will not just send 3, He'll send 5,000 angels. 5,000. If they came at you now. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying to the believers, don't worry. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as long as you trust Allah, you have taqwa of Allah, you have God-fearingness of Allah, you have patience and you're steadfast, meaning that you're not running around. You're going back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Part of tasbiru, part of steadfastness and sabr is that you're not looking for an escape. You're not looking for help from anyone. You go firstly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's tasbiru. That you go firstly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what Allah says. That we're going to send angels who are going musawwimin, that we're going to enable them with their own battle token. They're going to be ready for the battle. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. We're going to be ready. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the Prophet ﷺ and to believers that they are going to be ready. This is what's going to happen. They're going to be ready. The angels will be ready to defend the believers. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا جَعَلَهُ اللَّهُ إِلَّا بُشْرَى لَكُمْ وَلِتَطْمَئِنَّ قُلُوبُكُمْ بِهِ وَمَا النَّصْرُ إِلَّا مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ الْعَزِيزِ الْحَكِيمِ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and Allah has not made it, وَمَا جَعَلَهُ اللَّهُ, Allah has not made it, إِلَّا بُشْرَى لَكُمْ, except as a glad tidings to you all. Allah has not made it except as a glad tidings to you. وَلِتَطْمَئِنَّ قُلُوبُكُمْ, and that your hearts may find rest. That your hearts may find rest assured thereby. وَمَا نَصْرُ إِلَّا مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ عَزِيزِ الْحَكِيمِ. And there is no victory except from Allah the Invincible, and the All-Wise, the Hakim. This is the last verse in Surah Al-Imran that touches, of the 4 verses, that touches upon what? Badr. Ghazwat al-Badr, the Battle of Badr. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala concludes the verse and He says, Allah has وَمَا جَعَلَ اللَّهُ إِلَّا بُشْرًا. Allah did not make it for you except as a great bushra, a great victory. Glad tidings. Meaning that the battle is a glad tiding to you. What is the Battle of Badr? Except that the Prophet, that it proved that those believers were firm in their faith. Firm. Those believers that fought at Badr were firm in their faith. Because they're going to fight the mushrikeen at against odds. 113 versus 960 of the disbelievers, the mushrikeen, came to fight. 113 believers. But they were steadfast. They were steadfast. And they held to trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and trusted the Prophet ﷺ. They followed the Prophet ﷺ into battle. Because they trusted him. They trusted him. They trusted Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so this is where the companions who fought were always significantly ranked in reverence above the other companions. The companions of Badr, in the books of Sirah, in the words of the Prophet ﷺ, the companions that fought at Badr was always considered in reverence to be higher, in more revered status than the other companions. Not that the other companions didn't have taqwa to Allah, did not fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or did not have consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No, they did. But the companions of Badr were in higher ranks because of the odds, because of their trust, and because it was shown in the Battle of Badr. It was shown. Now, one of the lessons of the Battle of Badr is a lesson that we should take, that when the community is faced with difficulties, or you're faced with difficulties, overwhelming difficulties, what do? You do what the Prophet ﷺ did, and that he made dua. The Prophet ﷺ was making dua. In fact, there's narrations of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, Imam Ahmad in his Musnad narrates the hadith, that when he was going to sleep the night of Badr, the night before the battle started, that he went to sleep and he saw the Prophet ﷺ in a distance. And he saw him sitting up and he saw him making dua. He saw the Prophet ﷺ making dua. And he went to sleep. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu. And when he woke up back, the narration is also narrated by Ali ibn Abi Talib in another narration. When they woke up back, they saw the Prophet ﷺ in the same position, still making dua. So the Prophet ﷺ was making dua, and he was supplicating all the time. Why was he supplicating all the time? Because that's what you do when you face difficulties. When you face difficulties, and you face odds, and you face tests or trials, you face a bala, or you face a fitna or something, that's what you do. You make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the belief that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to help you and give you a way out. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will provide a makhraja. He will provide a way out. That's a promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you don't think there's a way out, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will provide a way out. When you think there's no help, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help you. Because who's the greatest helper? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When there's no one else to turn to, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one you need to turn to. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one that you need to turn to. Now the final verse we'll quote here is this verse that talking about dua. The Prophet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِذْ تَسْتَغِيثُونَ رَبَّكُمْ فاستجاب لكم إني ممدكم بألف من الملائكة مردفين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Anfal, the verse, and He says, if تستغيثون ربكم. So remember when you are all crying out to your Lord for help. This is istighatha. When you are all crying out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to your Lord for help. فَاسْتَجَابَ لَكُمْ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we answered you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He answered you. He answered, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنِّي مُمِدُّكُمْ بِأَلْفٍ مِّنْ الْمَلَائِكَةِ مُرْدِفِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded and said, I shall aid you with 1,000 angels. Murdifin means that they came in succession. There was no breakage. 1,000 kept coming, all of them kept coming. Murdifin in succession. There's no break in the line of the angels coming. That's what it means, Murdifin. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, here He tells the Prophet ﷺ, the believers, what? That when you, and remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and remember when you were all crying out, when you were all making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for help. You're all asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for help. And what happened? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answered you. He answered you immediately. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answered you immediately. And He says, what shall I aid you? I shall aid you with 1,000 angels. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I'll bring 1,000. Then 3, then 5 came. As we hear in the verse in Ali Imran that we covered, this is the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is what, in the lessons of Badr are plenty. There are a lot. The lessons of Badr is a lot. There's a lot of lessons to learn from the Battle of Badr. Lots of lessons. Will suffice with this, that you trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whenever you face difficulty, anything you face, trust in Allah. Put your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Put your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And secondly, ask. Make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to do in the Quran. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks us to ask Him that if you want something, ask. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will answer. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will answer our du'as. This is the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran. So again, the Battle of Badr is significant. It happened in Ramadan on the 17th. It happened on the 17th day of Ramadan, which is 2 days away. And it's significant because of the fact of the trust and the level of taqwa and the level of faith that the believers had in the Prophet, because they had to trust the Prophet ﷺ, who marched them into battle against those odds, and the trust that they had with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they hold firm on their faith. They held firm in it. And so, likewise, whatever difficulties we face, we should hold firm in our faith and go back and return back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will provide for the believers. He'll provide. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will provide ease, and He'll provide a way out. And so we should never have any doubt of that. And we should remain steadfast in the face of difficulties, in the face of any trials or tribulations or tests that we may be having or going through. We stand steadfast with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with the Prophet ﷺ, and we rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that when the time is good for us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make a way out, and He'll inshallah ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will relieve us of the difficulty, the test, or the burden that we face. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us and guide us, forgive us, have mercy upon us, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase us in knowledge, practice their faith. Those who are sick, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala heal them and cure them. Those who pass away, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala His mercy, not for in shade. سبحانك وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم آمين. Inshallah, tomorrow we'll have a presentation again after Asr with Maulana Sheikh Hudayfa from the Malton Mosque. Inshallah, he'll be coming tomorrow to speak after Asr, Ili Asr. Inshallah, tomorrow at 6:15. And then he'll make a presentation. Maulana Hudayfa Patel, Imam of the Malton Masjid, inshallah, will be here. We'll come back, inshallah, Hafid Bilal is coming to recite Quran. That will be in about 5 minutes, inshallah. In 5 minutes, there'll be Quran recitation that will take us to the time of